The courtroom was already full when Harold Jessup walked in carrying a folded piece of paper no larger than his palm. People had come from as far as the next county. A retired schoolteacher who had taught Harold's children sat in the fourth row. 3 other farmers who owed money to the same bank occupied seats near the aisle, watching with expressions that looked like hope, trying not to show itself. Word had spread that First Regional Bank, the oldest lending institution in Mercer County, was foreclosing on the Jessup farm, a 160-acre property that had been in the family for 4 generations and had never missed a payment in 41 years. Most people in that room already knew how foreclosure hearings ended. When a bank with a legal department forecloses on a farmer with a folded napkin, the paperwork usually wins. But something about Harold Jessup didn't look defeated, because tucked into the breast pocket of his one good shirt was a paper napkin from a diner that had closed in 1978. The clerk at the entrance noticed the napkin when Harold reached for his ID. "What's that, sir?" Harold paused. The napkin was yellowed, soft at the folds, with faded blue ballpoint writing visible through the thin paper. One corner had a coffee ring stain. The other had a small tear held together with tape that had itself turned brown with age. "Evidence," Harold said. His attorney, a woman named Patricia Connor, who had taken the case pro bono after reading about it in the county paper, handed the clerk a brief. The clerk read it, shrugged, and waved them through. Harold walked to the defense table and sat down. He placed the napkin flat on the table beside a manila folder. That was everything he had. Across the aisle, First Regional Bank's legal team occupied 4 chairs. Lead counsel Thomas Meyer, who also happened to be the bank president's son, arranged loan documents, payment histories, and a certified copy of the original mortgage in neat stacks. He glanced at the napkin and leaned toward his paralegal. "Is that what I think it is?" The paralegal squinted. "Looks like a napkin." Thomas almost laughed. "This won't take long." First Regional Bank had been founded in 1952 by Arthur Meyer, Thomas's father. Arthur had built the bank on handshake relationships with farmers, men whose word and land were their collateral. He'd made loans over coffee at Dottie's Diner on Main Street, written terms on whatever was handy, and sealed them with a handshake. Thomas Meyer had taken over in 2019. He had an MBA from the State University and a vision for the bank that didn't include 185-acre farmland loans written on napkins. Within 2 years, he had modernized the loan portfolio, hired a compliance team, and begun calling in loans that he considered underperforming. The Jessup loan was one of them. Harold owed $34,200, the remainder of a balloon note that Thomas had restructured from the original terms. The new terms required a lump sum payment by December 31. Harold didn't have $34,200. He had cattle, soybeans, and a napkin. The restructuring had happened in Thomas Meyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon in February 2021. Harold remembered the date because it was the same day he'd sold 8 heifers at the county auction, a transaction that had put $11,400 in his account and left him feeling briefly like the finances were manageable. Thomas had called him in to review the loan paperwork. He said it was routine. He said all legacy loans were being brought up to date. He used phrases like modernizing the portfolio and regulatory compliance and standard documentation. He put the new papers on the desk and pointed to the signature lines. Harold read slowly. He was not a fast reader, and he knew it. The document was 14 pages long. He asked about the balloon clause on page 7. "That's standard," Thomas said. "It just means there's a final payment at the end. But the payments between now and then are actually lower than what you've been paying. You're saving money." Harold signed. He drove home. He put the papers in the filing cabinet beside the old cigar box and didn't think about them again for 4 years. The balloon payment notice arrived in September 2025. It amounted $34,200 by December 34. Harold sat at the kitchen table and read it 3 times. He called the bank. Thomas wasn't available. A loan officer explained the terms. Harold said, "There must be a mistake." His loan was supposed to be based on harvest revenue the way it had always been. The loan officer said, "Mr. Jessup, the current note supersedes any prior agreements. The balloon is due December 31. Harold called his neighbor. His neighbor called a lawyer. The lawyer said foreclosure cases were hard to fight and expensive to lose. It was Harold's granddaughter, a community college student studying business law, who asked the question that changed everything. "Grandpa, do you have the original loan agreement?" "The one your dad signed. It was on a napkin," Harold said. "Do you still have it?" Harold went to his father's desk. A roll top that hadn't been opened in 3 years. In the top drawer, under a cigar box filled with receipts, gas station credit card slips, and a 177 calendar, he found it. Folded twice, yellowed, with a coffee ring on one corner and faded blue ink that was still legible. He held it up to the light. Arthur Meyer's handwriting was there, the same handwriting Harold had seen on birthday cards and Christmas notes growing up, because Arthur Meyer had been the kind of banker who remembered his customers' families. Harold called Patricia Connor. She drove out the next day. She held the napkin with 2 hands carefully, the way you'd hold a document that was 63 years old and made of paper designed to last about 63 seconds. In March 1962, Harold's father, George Jessup, had sat across from Arthur Meyer at Dottie's Diner. George needed $8,000 to buy an adjacent 40 acres. Arthur agreed. He wrote the terms on a paper napkin: $8,000 principal, 4% interest, annual payments based on harvest revenue, no balloon, no acceleration clause. Both men signed it. They shook hands. George bought the land. For the next 41 years, the Jessups paid exactly according to those terms. Annual payments varied with harvests, $600 in a bad year, $1,500 in a good one. The bank accepted every payment. Arthur Meyer never once questioned the arrangement. When Thomas restructured the loan in 2021, he replaced the napkin terms with a standard commercial note, fixed payments, balloon clause, 90-day acceleration. Harold signed the new documents because Thomas told him it was just a formality, same loan, modern paperwork. It was not the same loan. The balloon clause triggered a $34,200 lump sum payment due in December 2025. When Harold couldn't pay, Thomas filed for foreclosure. Harold sat at his kitchen table the night the foreclosure letter arrived. He read it 3 times. Each time the number looked larger. $34,200. He had maybe $6,000 in savings and a herd of cattle that wouldn't sell until spring. He called Patricia Connor the next morning. She was a legal aid attorney who had been profiled in the county paper for taking on 3 foreclosure cases pro bono the previous year. She won 2 of them. "Tell me about the original loan," Patricia said. Harold told her. His father, George, sitting across from Arthur Meyer at Dottie's Diner. The coffee, the napkin, the mug, the handshake, 41 years of payments that never missed and never followed the new contract's terms. "The bank accepted variable payments for 4 decades?" Patricia asked. "Every year, sometimes $600, sometimes $400. Arthur never complained. His son never complained either. Not until he decided the farm was worth more as a foreclosure than a relationship." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Do you still have the napkin?" "My father kept everything that man ever wrote." "Go find it." Harold went to his father's old roll-top desk in the back bedroom. He opened the top drawer. Under a cigar box of receipts and a rubber-banded stack of tax forms, he found it. A paper napkin folded into quarters, yellowed, with a coffee ring on one corner and faded blue ballpoint writing on both sides. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was small and precise, Arthur Meyer's handwriting. Harold recognized it from birthday cards Arthur had sent his father for 30 years. The terms were clear: $8,000 principal, 4% interest, annual payments based on harvest revenue, no balloon, no acceleration clause. At the bottom, Arthur Meyer's signature. George Jessup's signature. March 1962. Harold held it up to the window light. The paper was so thin he could see his own fingers through it. He called Patricia back. "I found it. Bring it to me." And Harold, "Don't fold it any more than it already is." Patricia Connor had asked Harold one question. "Do you still have the napkin?" Harold went to his father's desk. In the top drawer under a cigar box of receipts, he found it. Patricia filed a defense based on promissory estoppel, the legal principle that when someone relies on a promise for decades, the promise becomes enforceable even if it was never put into a formal contract. Thomas's attorneys laughed, literally laughed. One of them wrote in a filing, "The defendant's case rests on a piece of diner refuse." Patricia requested a handwriting analysis of the napkin. The expert confirmed the handwriting on the napkin matched Arthur Meyer's signature from bank records. The ink was consistent with a ballpoint pen manufactured between 1958 and 1965. She also subpoenaed 41 years of payment records. Every single payment matched the napkin terms: variable, harvest-based, no balloon. Not once in 4 decades had the bank demanded fixed payments or a lump sum. The morning and the first this morning arrived in a navy suit. He carried a leather briefcase with the bank's logo embossed in gold. A reporter asked about the case. "This is a straightforward foreclosure," Thomas said. The borrower signed a note. The note has a payment schedule. The payment was missed. "That's how lending works." He paused. "My father ran this bank on handshakes. I run it on contracts. Contracts are what courts enforce." Inside, he leaned toward his counsel. "We'll be out by 11. Now the final hearing had arrived. The judge opened proceedings at 9:31 a.m. Thomas's team presented the signed note, the missed balloon payment, the foreclosure filing. Clean, simple, procedural. The borrower defaulted on a contractual obligation, counsel summarized. "We request the court enforce the foreclosure." The judge turned. "Defense?" Patricia stood. "One exhibit, Your Honor." One napkin." Harold stood. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the napkin. He walked to the evidence table. With both hands, he unfolded it slowly, once, twice, 3 times, and laid it flat on the wood. The courtroom was silent. The napkin looked impossibly small on the polished table. Yellowed, stained. The handwriting faded but legible. Thomas Meyer looked at it and said nothing. But his smile was gone. Patricia pointed to the napkin. "This is a loan agreement written by Arthur Meyer, founder of First Regional Bank, in March 1962 at Dottie's Diner. It outlines the terms of an $8,000 loan to George Jessup, 4% interest, payments based on annual harvest revenue, no balloon, no acceleration." She looked at Thomas. "It is signed by Arthur Meyer and by George Jessup." Thomas's counsel stood. "Your Honor, this is a napkin. I can see what it is." "Sit down." The gallery shifted. Patricia placed a bound stack of documents beside the napkin. "These are 41 years of payment records from First Regional Bank. Every payment Harold Jessup made from 1962 to 2021 matches the napkin terms. Variable, harvest-based. No fixed amount, no balloon." She paused. "For 41 years, the bank accepted payments under these terms. Not once did anyone at First Regional demand a different structure. The mud noticed. The mud was the first thing she truly noticed." Thomas shifted in his chair. His counsel was writing furiously. The 3 farmers sitting near the aisle leaned forward. Patricia placed a single-page report beside the records. "This is a certified handwriting analysis confirming that the writing on this napkin belongs to Arthur Meyer. The ink is consistent with a 1958 to 1965 ballpoint pen. The paper is consistent with commercial napkin stock from that era." She looked at the judge. "This is not a scrap of paper. This is a 63-year-old contract written by the bank's own founder, honored by the bank for 41 years. The courtroom went still. Thomas Meyer stared at the napkin. He had grown up in his father's house. He had seen his father write on napkins 100 times. He recognized the handwriting. Patricia placed one final document. Under promissory estoppel, established in state precedent, Owens v. Farmers Mutual, 1987, when a party relies on a promise to their detriment for an extended period, and the promisor knew of that reliance, the promise becomes enforceable. She placed her hand beside the napkin. George Jessup relied on these terms for the rest of his life. Harold Jessup relied on them for 20 more years after that. The bank accepted payment under these terms for 41 consecutive years. To foreclose now based on a restructured note that fundamentally altered the original agreement without adequate disclosure is a violation of the very trust Arthur Meyer built this bank on. The courtroom didn't make a sound. Thomas Meyer sat perfectly still. On the table in front of him, the leather briefcase with the embossed gold logo caught the overhead light. The judge removed his glasses. "The foreclosure is denied," he said. "The court finds sufficient evidence of a long-standing agreement relied upon in good faith, which the restructured note materially altered without adequate consideration." He looked at Thomas. "The court recommends the bank honor the original terms, and the court strongly suggests that First Regional review how it treats legacy borrowers." The gavel came down once. Outside, one of the other farmers, a man named Dwight, who owed the same bank $22,000, stopped Harold on the steps. "You saved your farm with a napkin," he said. Harold shook his head. "I didn't save anything. My father saved it. He just didn't know it at the time." "What do you mean?" Harold held up the napkin, now back in his breast pocket. "He kept every piece of paper that man ever wrote on. Every receipt, every note. He said Arthur Meyer's word was worth more than any contract." He paused. Turns out he was right. A reporter asked, "Were you worried?" Harold looked at the napkin. "This napkin survived 63 years in a desk drawer. Survived my father's passing. Survived a flood in 97. Survived my wife cleaning out that desk twice." He half smiled. "I figured if it made it this far, it could make it one more morning." 9 months later, First Regional Bank quietly reinstated the original loan terms for the Jessup property. They also reviewed 14 other restructured legacy loans. 3 were reverted to their original agreements. Thomas Meyer did not resign, but he stopped attending the County Farm Bureau meetings his father had never missed. Harold went back to work. The 160 acres stayed in the family. That spring, his granddaughter helped plant soybeans on the same 40 acres George Jessup had bought in 1962, and the napkin sat in a simple wooden frame on the mantelpiece, next to a photograph of George Jessup and Arthur Meyer shaking hands outside Dottie's Diner, 1962, both men smiling, the ink still wet on a promise neither of them thought anyone would ever need to prove.